What is up, guys? Thank you so much for being here. So today I'm talking about this lens right here, which is the Sigma 30mm f1.4 for all the Sony APS-C cameras. So let's just go ahead and get started. So as I mentioned, this is a 30mm lens, and it goes from f1.4 aperture all the way to f16. It has a 52mm filter thread, weighs 9.3 ounces or 264 grams, and a minimum focus distance of 11.81 inches. As for the physical feel of the lens, I like it a lot because it's got a nice rubberized texture for the focus ring, and the focus ring itself is very smooth, so it's not like too loose or too tight. I feel like it just turns very nicely. And then it comes with a lens cap and a lens hood, of course. Another thing I like about it is the markings that it has right along the lens. They're like a matte black, and so I just think that looks cool. So the overall just look and feel of the lens feels very high quality and just looks good in my opinion. It's not too glossy like some of the native Sony lenses. Not their newer ones, but some of their other ones are just a little bit too glossy. But I think that this just has a good look and feel to it. So now that we got the specs out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about all the pros. And by the way, if you're wondering what happened to my lip, my dog accidentally headbutted me a couple of days ago and kind of like busted it open. It was all swollen and stuff. But anyways, and if I start sweating, I can't really help it because I'm in a room with no AC and it's like 100 degrees outside. So we'll see. I'll try and keep it to a light gloss, but we'll see. The first and most obvious pro of this lens, and the reason that you're probably even interested in buying it, is the fact that it does open up to an f1.4 aperture. I mean, honestly, there's not really many lenses out there for like the Sony APS-C cameras that open up to f1.4. So, I mean, that alone is like one of the biggest reasons why you're gonna get this thing. And so with that comes some of the other pros, like the fact that it is super good in low light because it does open up to f1.4. So if you're taking any like photos at night or any kind of video at night or anything like that where you're using this maybe indoors, it doesn't have to be nighttime, but indoors or any low light situation, then having that f1.4 is just huge because it just lets in so much more light. And then another pro that comes with that f1.4 is the bokeh. When you're taking pictures or video at night and you have that shallow depth of field, it really blurs out the background. And so having an f1.4 is gonna blur it out even more and just give you like that dreamy, creamy looking background that looks a little bit more professional and a little bit more cinematic if that's what you're going for. And it just allows you to do a lot of cool things with it that you can't get that look if you don't have an f1.4 lens. That alone gives you a couple of those pros, the low light performance and the creamy background and the cool bokeh that you get with it. Another pro that we kind of touched on a little bit at the beginning is the build quality. I mean, it is just a very well-built lens. It feels very good. It looks good. The focus ring is easy to grip and like easy to turn smoothly. And so yeah, that's definitely a pro. But obviously the number one pro about this is the f1.4. And then actually another pro is the autofocus. So the autofocus is actually very, very snappy and good. I would say for what it is, it's very, very snappy and good. It's not gonna be as good as like a native Sony lens, but for being a non-native Sony lens, for the APS-C cameras, this is pretty much as good as I've used personally. And from some other videos I've seen, like before I bought this and all that, they kind of said the same thing. They felt that this had a really good autofocus system. Now it is a little bit noisy, so the autofocus, I guess, you know, we're getting into the cons now, but the autofocus is a little bit noisy on this thing, so just keep that in mind. If you're gonna be filming like a video with it, you wanna make sure that you have some kind of like external mic because the mic on the camera will probably pick up that sound. By the way, one more pro about the lens before we get into like the rest of the cons is the price. I just feel like it's a super good deal for what you're getting, everything we talked about with the shallow depth of field and how sharp it is and all that. But it's around $266 right now, which I think is pretty ridiculous because when I bought it, I think it was around $320 or something. And at that point, it had already dropped in price a little bit. and I thought it was a super good deal for what you're getting. I mean, it's a f1.4 lens, and so the fact that I got that for $300 something was just super good. But now I just recently saw it on Amazon for 266 bucks, and that's for a brand new lens. It's not like a used version of it or anything, so you don't have to worry about it having like scratches or maybe some kind of internal damage that you don't know about. So anyways, the only reason I'm mentioning that is because it is a really good deal, and I don't know if that's like temporary or if they just lowered the price because it's getting a little bit older now. I think this lens has been out for like 4 or 5 years, which isn't that long. It still holds up perfectly fine. But anyways, if you're interested, I'll go ahead and put a link in the description to that one on Amazon that I saw for 266 bucks. It really helps out my channel, so I would appreciate it if you use that link to get the lens. But then on top of that, I mean, you're just getting a good deal, so it's there for convenience for you. But regardless of whether you use my link or not, it still doesn't change the fact that this is a super good deal. So just keep that in mind. If you're looking for like a prime lens that you get a lot of bang for your buck, then this is definitely it. As for the rest of the cons, they're mostly all just like super small things. I mean, some of them you can't even really consider cons, but I'm just gonna say them anyways because I needed something for the list. And so for the cons, I would say it doesn't have weather sealing, which, I mean, it is a con, but at the same time, there's not really that many Sony APS-C lenses that has weather sealing. And then another thing is the autofocus. Even though I did mention it is very good, it's still not quite as good as some of most of the native Sony lenses. So that's why I said it's not really a con because it's still very, very good. And then I guess the size, even though I like it and I don't think it's too big, it's not as small and compact and lightweight as some of like the Sony alternatives. It's just like slightly bigger and slightly heavier, but I mean, it's still a small lens. I mean, look at it, it's still very small and compact. The only other con that I would mention that really is a con, at least in my opinion, depending on what you do with your lenses, but the fact that it doesn't have OSS or any like image stabilization, that to me is the only con, because if you don't have a camera that has image stabilization in it, now luckily I do, so it doesn't really make too much of a difference, but it still would be even more stable if the lens had it as well. But yeah, if you don't have a camera with image stabilization and you plan on doing a lot of handheld video, then you might struggle a little bit just because, I mean, there's nothing to stabilize your footage, so you're gonna get those little jitters and stuff, but that's pretty much the only issue. But if you're using a gimbal or just some other techniques to try and stabilize it, you could probably get away with it. Especially with a gimbal, you'd be fine. But yeah, so for video, if you don't have a camera with that kind of stabilization, and you're not using a tripod, of course, obviously with a tripod you'd be fine, but just keep that in mind. That's pretty much the only real con about the lens, but that's probably a big part of what keeps the price down, is the fact that it doesn't have the image stabilization, because that's just more technology that they would have to put into the lens. And so that's probably a big part of why they're able to kind of like keep the price down and then just focus on sharpness and all the other pros that you get with the lens. So that's pretty much all the pros and cons. I just want to talk about like what I use this lens for, just to give you some ideas as to what you could use it for. Obviously, it's very good for photography because in that case you don't really need OSS. At least not in most situations, I should say. What I use it for is I typically use it as my main lens for my talking head videos like this. So for all the videos where I've been in this studio, because I've only been in the studio that I made in my garage for like the last 5 or 6 videos maybe, but all those were shot with this lens because again, it's good in low light and it's kind of dark in here, and then it gives you that shallow depth of field, so it really blurs out my background. And so this is the first one that hasn't been shot on this lens, and this is a super good affordable option just to kind of stick on your camera, throw it on a tripod, and make all your talking head videos. But that pretty much wraps up the video, so I hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you guys like this kind of stuff, like lens reviews, or especially like Sony camera gear, or even like camera backpack reviews, all that kind of stuff, I'm gonna be putting out a lot more videos here in the future, so don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And also go ahead and hit the like button. It's like a super small, simple thing that you can do that really helps out my channel, so I would appreciate that as well. And thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.